Have you ever felt like you've done everything to heal, but an old wound still pulls you back? A memory, a word, even the tone of someone's voice can drag you into a storm you thought you had already escaped. This is the nature of unresolved trauma. It lingers, not only in the mind but in the body, echoing in patterns of fear, silence, and self-betrayal. You may think you are free, but the nervous system still remembers what the conscious mind has buried. This is why shadow work matters. It is not about erasing the past, but about transforming it into the foundation of your power. There are signs that trauma still shapes the story of your life, even when you want to believe you've moved on. The first is the persistence of self-abandonment. You silence your truth in order to keep the peace. You minimize your needs so others feel comfortable. You walk away from your own boundaries, and each time you do, the little girl inside you, who once learned that love had to be earned through sacrifice, sinks deeper into the shadows. Shadow work reveals this pattern, not to shame you, but to help you recover the lost promise to protect her. Another sign is the way your body reacts in moments that don't match the present. Your heart races, your breath shortens, your hands tremble, though there is no threat near you. This is the body keeping score, the somatic imprint of what was too overwhelming to process when it first happened. The rational mind may tell you that you are safe, but the body whispers otherwise. In Jungian terms, this is the unconscious rising to claim attention through the language of sensation. The shadow insists on being seen, not because it seeks to harm you, but because it carries what you once disowned. Silence can also reveal trauma's grip. You avoid confrontation even when your boundaries are crossed. You avoid your own reflection when it speaks too honestly. You avoid intimacy when it threatens to expose the wound you've hidden. Avoidance is a kind of prison, a cage built not of iron but of fear. But what if the cage was never locked? This is where the work begins, to test the bars and discover they dissolve when you choose to stand in your worth. There is also the haunting of repetitive relationships. You attract the same kinds of people, replay the same conflicts, end up with the same heartbreak. Jung called this unconscious repetition the compulsion to reenact. It is as if the psyche longs for resolution and keeps staging the old play, hoping one day the ending will be rewritten. Shadow work asks you to step backstage to meet the director, the wounded child, who has been scripting these stories all along. Only by acknowledging her grief can you free her from directing your fate. Guilt and shame often follow, lingering like shadows at the edge of joy. Shame whispers that you are not enough, that your scars make you unworthy. Guilt convinces you that your boundaries are selfish, that choosing yourself is betrayal. These voices are not truth, they are inherited echoes of the past. In the archetypal language, they are the ghosts of the wounded maiden, silenced before her voice could blossom. To step into the wise woman, you must listen not to her accusers, but to her own hidden song. A final sign is the hollow ache of disconnection. You may feel cut off from your own emotions, unable to cry or to trust joy. You may feel like an outsider in your own life, as though a part of you was left behind long ago. This is the forgotten promise, the unkept vow to the child you once were, to never abandon her again. Shadow work is the path of retrieving her, not to turn back time, but to weave her into the woman you are becoming. Every one of these signs is both a warning and an invitation. They tell you where the shadow is calling, where the healing must go deeper. The archetype of the wounded healer teaches that the very place of injury can become the source of wisdom. Your brokenness is not a flaw but the soil where resilience grows. Yet awareness alone is not enough. The question is, will you dare to descend into the shadows and meet what you have feared to face? To descend into the shadows is not an act of punishment but of reclamation. Jung understood that what we repress does not vanish, it waits. Like seeds buried deep in the soil, these forgotten parts of the self press upward, seeking light. When they are ignored, they distort into projections and compulsions. When they are welcomed, they become medicine. The descent is never easy because it asks you to walk into the places you once swore you would never return, but it is also the only path that leads to freedom. One of the clearest confrontations comes with the inner child. She holds the first impressions of abandonment, of shame, of love withheld. Perhaps she remembers nights of silence when no one came to soothe her tears. Or maybe she recalls the way her voice was silenced, her truth dismissed as inconvenient. She is not a memory but an archetype wit. Hinyu living still, and every time you betray your own boundaries, you betray her too. Shadow work invites you to kneel beside her, to finally listen. Imagine her standing at the edge of a forest, afraid to step inside but unable to go back. The forest is the unconscious, dark, and full of creatures you've avoided. To enter means encountering the grief you suppressed, the rage you buried, the loneliness you denied. But within that forest also waits the wise woman, the future self who already knows the path, who carries the lantern of understanding. She is not there to rescue the child, but to walk with her until she becomes whole. Patterns of self-betrayal often surface first. You may say yes when your soul screams no. You may abandon your own rest to win approval. You may dismiss your needs because they feel inconvenient to others. Each act of self-betrayal is an echo of the child who once learned that her survival depended on pleasing. To break this cycle, the shadow must be faced. The pain of admitting how often you've abandoned yourself is sharp, but it also cracks the door to self-remembering. This is where the nervous system reveals its truth. The body tenses, the breath shortens, the stomach knots. These reactions are not weakness but survival codes written long ago. Trauma lives in the body because the child could not fight, could not flee, and so her body froze. To meet this frozen energy with compassion is to begin thawing the ice. Slowly, gently, through breath, touch, and awareness, the body learns safety again. Each release is a message to the child. You are no longer trapped, you are no longer alone. But shadow work is not only about release, it is also about integration. The rage you feared may hold your fire for justice. The grief you buried may deepen your compassion. The fear you avoided may sharpen your intuition. In Jung's words, individuation is the union of opposites, where shadow and light no longer fight but weave together. What was once shame becomes strength. What was once grief becomes wisdom. The woman who can embrace her shadow no longer needs to fear what others see, because she has already seen it herself. Sometimes the shadow appears in relationships. You may notice you choose partners who echo the coldness of a parent, or you may find yourself silencing your truth to keep love from leaving. These are not accidents. They are invitations to finally stand where you once fell. When you speak where you were silenced, when you set a boundary where one was ignored, you rewrite the story. The past cannot be changed, but the meaning you carry from it can. That is the quiet revolution of shadow work. But here lies the danger: to confuse awareness with healing. Knowing the wound is not the same as tending it. Understanding the trauma does not erase its imprint. The true work happens in the daily choice to honor the child, to listen to the body, to walk into the forest with steady courage. And each time you do, the wise woman steps closer, her lantern glowing stronger. So the question becomes, are you willing to face the forest, not once, but as many times as it takes until the child within no longer hides from her own voice? Every descent into the forest brings an unveiling. The shadows that seemed monstrous at first begin to reveal their true faces. The anger that frightened you is not a beast, but a guardian who once tried to protect you from further harm. The grief that felt like drowning is actually a river that carries you back to your humanity. When the masks of fear are removed, what is left are fragments of the self, waiting for integration. This is why the confrontation is not about slaying demons, but about reclaiming exiled allies. In Jungian terms, the shadow is not evil, it is potential. It holds the raw materials of the self, pieces of vitality that were pushed underground because they were judged unsafe, unworthy, or unlovable. When these pieces remain buried, they distort into shame and sabotage. But when they are welcomed, they restore power. Shadow work is the art of turning what was once hidden into the foundation of wholeness. It is the alchemy of the soul. The wise woman archetype rises here as a guide. She is not the naive child nor the silenced maiden. She is the one who has walked through loss and yet chosen to grow roots in the ashes. She does not fear the dark because she knows the dark is fertile. She whispers, "Do not be afraid to touch the wound. That is where your medicine is." Her presence is quiet but unshakable, a reminder that wholeness comes not from perfection but from inclusion. As you walk deeper into this work, the nervous system begins to soften. The hypervigilance that once kept you on edge starts to dissolve when you show your body consistent signals of safety. Breath becomes the bridge. A slow inhale tells the body, "It is safe to arrive." A gentle exhale says, "It is safe to release." Over time, the body learns it no longer has to live. In the past, the forest no longer feels like a battlefield but a sanctuary. Yet the path is not linear. There will be days when old wounds resurface, when shame whispers louder, when the urge to self-abandon feels overwhelming. This is not failure. It is the spiral nature of healing. Each return to the wound is not the same as before. You come with more wisdom, more strength, more compassion. Just as seasons cycle, your healing cycles too, each time carving deeper roots of resilience. Relationships remain one of the sharpest mirrors. You may feel the sting of being unseen, unheard, unvalued. In those moments, the temptation is to collapse back into silence. But here lies the turning point, to stand, even trembling, and speak your truth. To say no where once you could not. To say yes where once you denied yourself. Every act of self-honoring is a signal to the inner child that she is no longer abandoned. And each signal strengthens her trust in you, the adult she always needed. Sometimes the confrontation is less about others and more about the dialogue inside. The critical voice that berates you, the inner persecutor that repeats the shaming words of the past, is also a shadow fragment. Instead of exiling it, shadow work invites you to listen. Beneath the cruelty often lies fear, the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, the fear of power. When you listen without collapsing, the persecutor transforms. Its harshness softens, its energy can be redirected. What was once sabotage becomes self-discipline. What was once cruelty becomes clarity. But here comes a pattern interrupt. What if the enemy inside was never an enemy at all? What if it was simply a child's desperate attempt to keep you safe? To realize this is to begin a radical reframe. You are not broken. You are not at war with yourself. You are a woman carrying the echoes of every age you've been, gathering them into the circle of your becoming. And in that circle, no voice is banished, no wound ignored. Everything belongs. When everything belongs, the meaning of strength changes. Strength is no longer about keeping it together or never falling apart. It becomes the courage to fall apart consciously, to sit in the ruins without abandoning yourself, and to rebuild without rushing. Stoic wisdom echoes here. The past cannot be altered, but the way you carry it can. What once weighed you down can become the very thing that steadies you. Pain becomes less of a prison and more of a teacher. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating every hidden piece into a unified whole. It is not the pursuit of perfection, but the reclamation of authenticity. Individuation requires entering the shadow, not to conquer it, but to learn its language. The forgotten child, the silenced maiden, the raging protector, all become parts of the one woman rising. The woman who is no longer defined by her trauma, but by the wisdom forged from it. This wisdom first shows itself in how you inhabit your own presence. No longer tense, waiting for the next wound. No longer silencing yourself to keep others comfortable. Instead, you begin to move with a quiet groundedness. You listen before reacting. You pause before collapsing into old patterns. You feel the pull of the past, but you do not obey it. This is how the nervous system learns to trust, and how the child within learns she is safe at last. But there is another layer, the ancestral shadow. Sometimes the pain you carry did not begin with you. It is the grief of your mother, the silence of your grandmother, the survival strategies passed down through generations. The wise woman archetype knows this truth. Healing is never only personal. When you confront the shadow, you are breaking cycles. You are rewriting a script that has run for centuries. Each boundary you set is a gift to those who came before and those who will come after. In this space, shame begins to dissolve. Shame thrives in silence, but it cannot survive when spoken in truth and held with compassion. Imagine holding that little girl's hand as she finally says the words she was never allowed to speak. The moment her voice is honored, shame crumbles. And with that crumbling, a new kind of power rises, not loud, not desperate, but steady. The power of a woman who has met her shadow and lived to tell the story. Relationships shift again at this stage, but not because others change. They shift because your standards change. You no longer mistake crumbs for love. You no longer confuse chaos with passion. You no longer apologize for existing. What once felt like loss, the ending of old patterns, the release of toxic bonds, now feels like liberation. The inner child watches as you choose differently, and in her eyes you see a reflection of the woman she has been waiting for. But a deeper question emerges. What will you build with this freedom? Shadow work does not end at release. The ascent begins when you plant something new in the soil that was barren. It could be a practice of silence that nourishes you. It could be a community that reflects your worth. It could be a vision for your future rooted not in fear but in choice. Healing is not only about what you leave behind, it is about what you step into. Pattern interrupt. And if you no longer needed to be rescued, what would you dare to create? The wise woman smiles at this question, for she knows the final stage of shadow work is not survival, but embodiment. To embody means to walk through the world as though your worth is unquestionable. To no longer beg for permission, to no longer explain your boundaries, to no longer carry shame as if it were yours to bear. Embodiment is the moment the inner child and the wise woman merge, and you step forward as one. Embodiment does not happen in a single moment of revelation, but through steady, lived choices. Each time you speak a boundary with clarity, you embody healing. Each time you rest without guilt, you embody self-worth. Each time you choose love that honors rather than diminishes you, you embody transformation. What once felt foreign, belonging, dignity, wholeness, becomes your natural state. The woman who once carried fragments now walks as a whole. This embodiment changes the way you see yourself. No longer defined by what was done to you, you begin to define yourself by what you are creating. The trauma that once held you hostage becomes a scar, a reminder of survival but no longer the script of your life. Jung described individuation as the blossoming of the self, the union of shadow and light. It is the moment the woman looks at her reflection and sees not the broken girl, not the silenced maiden, but the sovereign one who has integrated them all. The wise woman archetype now stands within you, not as a distant guide but as your own voice. She speaks in your choices, in your silence, in your boundaries. She does not beg for approval because she has learned that worth is not granted, it is embodied. She does not fear solitude because she carries her own sanctuary within. Her presence is not loud, but when she enters a room, she brings a sense of gravity that others feel without words. This shift also brings clarity in how you walk through relationships. You no longer chase love because you know your value. You no longer collapse when someone withdraws because your foundation is within. You no longer carry resentment like a weight because forgiveness is not about excusing others, it is about freeing yourself. With each choice, You weave a life that reflects the truth you once thought was impossible, that you are enough simply by existing. But embodiment is not just for you. It radiates outward. When a woman heals, she becomes a mirror for others who are still lost in the shadows. She shows what is possible, not by preaching, but by being. Her presence alone becomes medicine because she carries proof that wholeness is not a dream but a lived reality. This is how the archetype of the wounded healer fulfills itself, by transforming pain into wisdom, then offering that wisdom as a path for others. The Stoics remind us that control over the past is an illusion, but mastery over the self is liberation. You cannot change what happened. You cannot rewrite the childhood, erase the betrayals, or undo the silences. But you can choose what those experiences make of you. You can choose to let them chain you or to let them refine you. True resilience is forged in this choice, the quiet decision to rise again and again until the rising becomes who you are. Future pacing now beckons. Imagine yourself 6 months from now, walking with shoulders steady, breath calm, and eyes clear. The little girl no longer cries alone, she walks beside you, hand in hand, finally safe. The wise woman no longer stands apart, she speaks through you, her wisdom guiding every step. Together, they are not separate identities but one whole being. And that being is you, finally home within yourself. So the forgotten promise is fulfilled. The child you once were is no longer abandoned. The woman you are now no longer hides. The wise woman you are becoming no longer fears. Integration is complete. And from this place, you do not chase love, you choose it. You do not beg for respect, you command it. You do not carry shame, you release it. This journey doesn't have to be walked alone. If you want to receive more profound lessons like this, subscribe to the channel to walk the healing path with me. Share the moment you finally said enough and reclaimed your power in the comments below. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.